familiar with. From the late 1950s until the mid-90s, thousands of West African children were unofficially fostered in Britain by white families.
Yes, it often happened when their parents came to the UK to study, but the arrangements weren't regulated. And while some had good experiences, others did not.
Well, now there's a new documentary. It's called White Nanny Black Child. It's actually on Channel 5 tonight at 10. It's going to shine a light on the lives of 9 children, all now adults, who grew up during that time.
It is a fascinating subject, and earlier we spoke to Abby Osho, who was fostered, and filmmaker Andy Mundy Castle. We started by asking Andy why he wanted to make the programme.
Well, I'm of mixed Nigerian-British heritage, so I'm constantly thinking of ways in which we can tell stories about people from different backgrounds that find Britain and call Britain their home. So for me, it was just a really interesting way to sort of talk about this pocket of British history that has been largely overlooked, largely forgotten, but hidden in plain sight, because you've got thousands of people who were involved with this unregulated practice of private fostering, who are British citizens. You know, they're walking around, and they're white families who would have had a young black child in their homes at some stage between the 50s and the 90s. So for me as a filmmaker, that was just a very fascinating canvas to explore.
So many stories to tell.
So many stories about, you know, kind of a unique British identity.
And Abby, this is part of your identity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And Andy got in touch with you, you got on board. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experience that will have been reflected in so many others as well?
Yeah, so I was fostered at 5 weeks old to a white working class family in Hastings, East Sussex. And there was myself and my brother and always maybe 2 or 3 other foster children, Nigerian foster children, and my foster mother, Irene, had 3 of her own children who were much older than us. And that was kind of the scene that we grew up in. And, you know, this was like the 60s. So these were very ignorant, racist times. But it was your lived experience every day. So after a while, you didn't even recognize it. My parents, I never lived with my biological parents. I always lived in Hastings with my foster parents until I decided to leave. And
I'm just thinking about that for anyone who's got children. What sort of impact did that have on you at the time, and what sort of lasting impact has that had on you and many others as well?
Yeah, and I think you'll see when people watch the documentary tonight and they see all the 9 different stories, I think the biggest impact for me was self-identity and self-acceptance. Because you're living in this white world as a black child or a black teenager, knowing that you don't really fit or belong. You don't speak your language, your mother tongue, so you don't kind of belong there either. So it's always like straddling between these 2 worlds. And in one way, the white world is comfortable, as it's known. In the other way, there's a learning who am I. And that's the Yoruba, the Nigerian side, which I got to find out much more about later on in life. So yeah, there were definitely complexities, and that's very much shown in the documentary.
Andy, why did you decide to help these people tell their stories in this particular way, getting together, going through therapy essentially together?
I mean, it's very easy to ridicule people's experiences if you don't understand their stories. You know, we look at the conversations that are happening now with kind of migration, or it's a very topical conversation in the news at the moment about is Britain right for black people? And I think, well, actually, we're all here. Diversity isn't something that we've created, it's not something that we've invented. So it's kind of, how do we elicit some compassion and empathy for people that are just a bit different from us? When you really boil it down, we are all the same, but there are complexities in our own independent identity. So I really wanted to kind of have a framework in which we could explore with compassion, the challenges that people may have if they consider themselves British, but there's a chink in the armour, and that was really what this was about, because I think if you bring people along a journey of compassion, they're more likely to understand your story. And so the retreat framework just felt like the perfect canvas to do that. Personally, I'd gone on a few retreats myself, and I realised how transformational they were. And so, with dads actually. You know, so that was, you know, I realized the power of just being with strangers and not feeling like you were being ridiculed in any way or anyone knew about your story.
I'm sure our viewers are probably in the same situation that Tessa and I were in when we first read about this. We feel a little bit ignorant, and you know we're all learning about this. I suppose, Abby, the question to you is, from these 9 people, the 9 stories you tell, and that extended into the 70,000 plus people, what do you want the audience to take away from watching the full programme tonight?
I think for me, I want the audience to understand the individual stories, and even though they're individual stories, these are many people's stories around the world. And for me, the whole thing about telling the stories is a part of the healing process. So it's really important that people understand whilst these people are telling their stories, they are going through a healing process. And that's allowing them to really become who they want to be.
It's a really powerful message. I'll be watching tonight. I'm sure many people will as well. Thank you so much for coming in and telling us about your story, and we look forward to watching the rest of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Morning.